Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this presentation, which should have been a interactive workshop, but we changed it for because the whole conference changed. And I would like to give a compliment to the organizers. I think it's very well organized. As a speaker, I've watched some of the streams today, and really cool to see how this works in an online conference. My name is Jaap Cannegieter. I'm a consultant in the Netherlands, testing consultant. And here you see my LinkedIn account. If you have got any questions, please ask them over Slack, and I will look at the Slack channel with my name in the next few hours, maybe few days. But if you got a question afterwards, please connect with me over LinkedIn and ask me the question. Then we can stay in touch. Today, I will talk about different ways of testing, from detailed scripting to freestyle exploratory testing. The idea is that there's not one best way to do testing. And I can better explain this using this photo. Here you see different people, and they're all wearing the same suit. And it's a beautiful suit, like you can see for the man in the middle, who fits the suit pretty well. But other people fit really in the suit, like you can see. So in a sense, there's not one size that fits all. And that's also counts for testing. Every organization is unique. Every project is unique. Every system is unique. So there's not one way to test all kinds of systems, but we have to master different kinds of testing and be able to judge which way of testing is best in your situation. So in this way, different kinds of testing, mastering different kind of testing could be seen as a kind of context-driven testing. The subject of this talk, why do we need different ways of testing? I've already covered that one. Then I'll give an overview of the different ways of testing, and then we will look how you can decide which way of testing is best in your situation. Our world is changing. In the last, let's say, decade, last 10 years, a lot of things changed. Agile, DevOps, test automation, different kind of systems, software as a service, testing as a service, CI/CD today, of course, security testing. All these different developments force us to adapt to the situation instead of come with one way of testing. And if we look at that a bit closer, we see that in the old days, planned testing, planning your tests very well was very important. Today, we think that flexibility is much more important. There's also the continuum between using a method or craftsmanship. We used to be very holding tight to a method, but nowadays we look more at craftsmanship, and we trust the individual tester much more than we used to. We used to have very much process focus. In the start of my career, about 25 years ago, we had these very thick process books, which should be maintained. And in this process book, we described how testing was done in a certain organization. And we don't do that very much in some organizations. This still happens. But nowadays we are more goal-oriented. What's the goal of the testing? What's the goal of the project we're in? Why do we build the system? And we're more focused on the goal than on the process itself. We used to test systems very thoroughly, especially when going to production was more difficult than nowadays. We used to test everything really, really deep. Today, we're more focused on delivering fast, delivering frequently, delivering small packages, of course. Some systems still have to be tested very thoroughly. Think about a mortgage system or other banking systems, or some government systems in which systems we calculate how much money certain people get or have to pay. We still test that very thoroughly, but fast has become really important today. And we used to follow standards like the ISO standard or ISTQB standards. Today we're more pragmatic. We use from the methods what we or the standards what we need in our situation, and we adapt it to our situation and our work. So we've seen it used to be planned, method focus, process focus, thoroughly testing and focus on standards. And today we're more focused on flexibility, craftsmanship. We're more goal oriented. We want to deliver fast and we're more pragmatic. So our testing should alter as well. If we look at the classical way of testing, and this is a way to show how classical testing can look like, then we see a more phases oriented system where we make our strategy and planning, we do our design and test case specification, we do the execution, and we close the system, and test management is done along the way. That's more the classical way of testing, and it's not always applicable anymore. So we can sometimes still use it, but not in every project. So don't try to use this way of testing all the time. Ask yourself the question, is this the best way? And if not, go back to the presentation I will give now, and then you will get some inspiration how you can also test your system. So the different forms of testing, different ways you can test a system. If we look at testing, we could divide it in two main streams. We could say it's scripted testing. You've already seen this picture where we're working in phases, where we're very focused on making a lot of documentation up front, like test plans, like design, using test design techniques to make your test cases, document your test case, and then execute it. So a lot of scripting. On the other hand, we have exploratory testing. Exploratory testing is around already for a long time, 20, 30 years. But people are starting to use it more today. I even got this t-shirt, I love exploratory testing, because it's really a new way of thinking about testing and doing testing. So we already got these mainstreams, and maybe you have the feeling now that there are actually two ways of testing: scripted testing and exploratory testing. But that's actually not the case. Here you see a continuum, and it should have gone from light gray, almost white, to dark gray, but somewhere along the line it changed to a more one color. But here you see different ways of testing, 6 different ways of testing on a continuum from scripted testing to exploratory testing. So we can make very detailed scripts or more global scripts. Session-based testing, bug hunts, is somewhere in the middle. It has some aspects of scripted testing, but it also has some aspects of exploratory testing. On the right-hand side, we see test tours and freestyle exploratory testing, which is very much exploratory testing. Are there only 6 ways to test a system? No, definitely not. When we came up with this idea, some colleagues and me spent some evenings together. We ordered some pizza, and we discussed things like this, and we came up with 28 different ways to test a system. And we were thinking, well, a picture with 28 different ways to test a system is a bit too much. So we selected 6. But for instance, scenario testing or process testing or things like that could also be placed in a continuum like this. So maybe you can make your own continuum as well. Let's dive a little deeper into detailed scripting and global scripting. We've already seen this picture in detailed scripting, and I would like to stress that the essence of detailed scripting is that you make all your scripts in very detailed form up front. So you spend a lot of time before the software is delivered. So you have to be involved really early. And I used to do a lot of detail scripting. Like I said, I've got 25 years of experience in IT projects, not only testing, but most of the time testing actually. And I did this a lot. But I found out that making your test strategy and test planning upfront in detail is a kind of uh, fake, not fake news, but it's a kind of fake because you got very less information, and all the new information will lead to a new strategy or new planning. So, and making your test designs and test specification up front also has got a backdraw. It's based on documentation, which is fine by me. But this documentation made by the developers is most of the time not very good. So our test designs are not very good. So those are some backdraws of detailed scripting. The good thing about detailed scripting is that you know very well what you're going to test during test execution, and you could already, not only theoretically, but I've seen it in practice, automate your test cases upfront. Using techniques like BDD, you can program your test cases, and then test execution is really short. So that can be an advantage of detailed scripting. What's the difference with global scripting? This is how a detailed script could look like. Suppose you're going to test an email agent, like your Outlook, or well, I don't know any other email agents actually, but there are others. And this could be a detailed test script for testing a certain case of your email Outlook. Go to the home screen, press the button New, enter in the field j.cannegieter@squareist.nl, which is actually my email address. So if you want to send me an email, here's my address. Push on the button File, select the document, enter something in this field, go to the email box and check whether the email and the attachment is delivered. The advantage of making a script this way is that that someone else can make the script than the person who is actually doing the test execution. So tester A can make the script and tester B can execute it. This adds flexibility to your test project. You're not depending on one certain tester to test a part of the system because he or she made this very detailed script. Global scripting, on the other hand, here we see a global script of the same test case. And it says make and send an email with an attachment to one recipient, so one person who gets it, and check whether the email and the attachment is delivered. So you need to have knowledge of the system you're testing to execute this test case. And with detailed scripting, you don't need this knowledge up front. So that's detailed scripting and global scripting. We go to the second, the third and fourth way of testing. I notice that I'm going faster than I should go. It probably has got to do with that I don't see any audience and there are no questions anywhere. So, but I'll go on, and maybe there are some questions in Slack and I can answer them afterwards. The third and fourth way of testing we know is session-based testing and bug hunts. And you will see some aspects of scripted testing, but also some aspects of exploratory testing. Session-based testing, when exploratory testing was introduced and was becoming popular, the backdraw for the project manager was that he had no idea what was actually happening during testing. With detailed scripting, you have your test design, you have your test strategy, you've got your test plan, you've got timelines, you know who is going to test which part of the system, so you're very much in control and you can show people that you are in control. If you do exploratory testing, you don't have that. So for project managers, exploratory testing was more like a big cloud very foggy. You've got no idea what's happening, who is doing what, why, when. All those questions were theoretically not answered. And managers want that. So they want to know what's actually happening. So when session-based testing was introduced, it went from this big cloud to some small clouds. Yes, there is exploratory testing, but for every test session, you make documentation. You make a test charter. It's called a test charter, which is a one-page test documentation, which is a kind of global scripting, maybe about on that level. And for every session, we make this test charter. Upfront, we can decide which sessions we're going to have. So you have a kind of plan. You can report about the sessions, so people get test reports, coverage can all be done with test sessions. You also see a smiling face with every session, and that's because you have some freedom within your test charter to test the way you would like to test. So it looks a bit like global scripting, but then done in sessions with a little bit more exploratory testing. So we've got sessions. We divide all the test work in sessions of 1 to 2 hours. We make test charters with a mission for every session. So the mission of this session is to find out whether all if we can do with the attachments in the email the things we like to do, and if it works well. That could be a mission. And then you got test points. Send an attachment to one person, send an attachment to several persons, send an attachment to a group, send an attachment to people who are in the CC of the email. All test points or test ideas in the same line as the test case before. You make notes during your testing because you don't have detailed scripts. You don't know upfront how you're going to test it exactly. So you make notes what you test and what you see, what the outcomes are. And you have a debrief at the end. You will discuss or report about the outcomes, and a tester will give an idea how the testing is done. A bug hunt is something like session-based testing, and here you see an example of a bug hunt. I made this picture myself. This is not my previous project, but a project I did 2 years ago. And here we're actually testing in pairs. To the left, you see these 3 people. It looks like they're testing with 3 people, but I was actually testing with the lady over there. We were sitting at the right. But I wanted to make a picture, and the guy on the left had a question. So, but at the back of the room, you see 2 other pairs, and we were all testing a part of the system. We called this a bug hunt because in 2 hours we wanted to catch as many bugs as we could. So we were going for the kill. Let's hunt for bugs, and that really gave a lot of energy. Here we work with 4 couples, with 4 pairs. We've also done bug hunts with 3 people working alone, or the maximum was 10 people. And then we also always worked in pairs because we had maximum 5 test laptops. So what we actually did was dividing all the test work in these small bug hunts. And I was making the charters up front together with a colleague of mine who was also on this project. And at the start, 2 times a week, but later 4 times a week we had an afternoon, mostly an afternoon, sometimes a morning, but mostly an afternoon, where we were testing and finding as many bugs as possible. And also had a prize every time for today there was a prize for the most difficult to find bug, or the bug with the bug we don't want to find into production, or as many bugs as possible, find as many bugs as possible. And I had a small prize like a package of cookies or a balloon or something to cheer things up. Sometimes I was testing, but a lot of times I was also making sure everybody had coffee, everybody had cookies, everybody was having fun, helping people with testing, explaining what was on the test charter. So I was more the coordinator, and we had the testers. For me, bug hunts are a variation on session based testing. So session based testing and bug hunts overlap a little bit, but there are definitely differences. Um, Both in session based testing and bug hunts, we work in sessions. We work with charters, we work with testers, we have a test manager, and it's also the same that we get information. What is different in bug hunts compared to session based testing is the length of the session. If I'm doing session based testing, then a professional tester is testing, not a user, but a professional tester. And this professional tester is going much deeper and is more focused usually. So the sessions are shorter, 1 to 2 hours. For me, as an extrovert, 2 hours doing the same thing is actually very long. Um, with a bug hunt, we had, well, I had bug hunts of 2 hours, but I'm trying to make them as long as possible because I got all the users in the room. I only use bug hunts actually for user acceptance testing, so testing with real users. Um, but maybe it can be done differently if you want that in your situation. Um, with bug hunts, I make sure there's more freedom in the charters, so there's more time to do some unstructured happy clicking, as I call it. So free testing. It's also can also be called this way. If you're doing bug hunts. Why? Because you're working with users. And users are not professional testers. So with professional testers, most of the testers we know are pretty structured. Their thinking is structures. So you gave them more. You don't give them that much freedom. You ask them more to follow the test charter. You can do session-based testing in pairs, but when you're testing in pairs, I usually do it in bug hunts. But that's a choice of mine. That's not black and white or something. And there's an extra goal with bug hunts. And the extra goal is when you're testing with users, you do not only get information about the quality of the system, but you also reach acceptance as long as the system under test has the right quality. So that's really important. So sometimes you don't get acceptance because people don't like the system, or they have too many bugs and they don't agree with going into production. An extra benefit of this is that it's more easy to let the business decide if you go live or not. In the example you've seen before, so in this organization, nobody asked me, can we go into production or not? No, there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 people here who, after the session, could say if we could go into production with this part of the system they were actually testing. So that there's no danger that the test manager has to decide whether we go into production or not. The last two, test tours and freestyle exploratory testing. I don't start with test tours, but I start with freestyle exploratory testing, and I will go a little bit deeper in what freestyle exploratory testing is. Exploratory testing is a style of software testing. And well, all the sentences are important, but this one is important because some people say it's a test design technique. And that's not true. Those people just misunderstood exploratory testing the way it was meant by Jerry Weinberg, who came up with the idea. So no matter who says it, no matter it's in ISTQB or not, it is an ISTQB, that's test design technique. That is wrong. It's a style of software testing. It's a style of software testing that emphasizes the personal freedom and responsibility of the individual tester. So as tester, you've got much more freedom and much more responsibility during testing. Why? Because you don't have these detailed scripts up front. So you decide on the spot what your next test case will be. And so that's your freedom. You decide what you're going to test, how you're going to test it. Your responsibility is to make sure that you test this system in the best way possible. To continually optimize the value of your work, all the time you're asking yourself, what's the most important test case I can do at this moment, so that the value of your work is maximized. And then the last part of the definition, the most well-known part, by treating test-related learning, test design, test execution, and test results interpretation as mutually supportive activities that run in parallel throughout the project. And there we were at the core difference between detailed scripting and freestyle exploratory testing. With detailed scripting, we see that test-related learning, test design, test execution, and test result interpretation are different phases. So they're done after each other. While with exploratory testing, they're done at the same time. So you just start testing. So you start with test execution, let's say, and then you see something and you say, hey, that's interesting. I want to test this. And then you start making a test design for that part. But you've also done some learning, by the way, because with execution you learn. And actually, you've also done some test result interpretation because you saw something and you decided on your interpretation what you're going to test next. So you really see these execution, learning, and strategy being a continuum where people are changing all the time. So let's see. Oh, this should have come differently in the screen. I don't know what happened, but actually only this text here, test point or test idea 1, should have been on the screen. Probably my fault, but the only thing you need for exploratory testing is, of course, a test environment, a test object, so a system under test. And actually, you need one extra thing, and that's one test case. And I always start with the goal of the system. Let's say that we're in the testing of the email agent again, we're testing Outlook. Then you need one test case. And the goal of Outlook is to send an email. Also to get an email, by the way. So I got 2 test points. Can I get emails and can I send emails? Okay, let's start with the test. Let's send an email. That's test point 1. And you're going to test this. So the arrow straight up is something you're going to do. You finish that test case no matter what. So you make an email to one person and you send it. While you are doing that, you see, hey, I can send emails to different persons. I can send emails with a CC. So test point 2 could be sending an email to different persons, or sending an email to people in the CC. Oh, that's interesting. This is the moment you're maximizing your value, because then you decide what's the most important test case I can do at this moment. And in this case, test point 2 is the test case you're going to do. Why? Because you've got the responsibility to make that decision, and you judge that test point 2, sending an email to different persons, is more important than sending an email to one person and one person in the CC. So you're going to test point number 2. Oh, good. That's this arrow. Then you see another test case. You see, hey, I can send an attachment as well. And there you have the same situation. Do I test point 3 or test point 4? And you got a choice again, and you decide test point 4 is more important. So we're going to test test point 4. And this way you're making your test strategy along the way, and you're building your test design along the way. And that's the essence of freestyle exploratory testing. The preparation is pretty low. You don't make test designs, test scripts, test charters. With freestyle exploratory testing, you don't do that. Of course, you can learn something about the system, but actually, if you follow the definition, then test-related learning, test design, test execution, test results are mutually supportive activities. So you don't do too much learning up front. You really start testing, and along the way, you will build your test design. That's the essence of freestyle exploratory testing. That's great. But it also is pretty scary for some people that they don't have details up front, and they don't have a test design up front, and they don't have a focus on their testing. So that's why, and that's the last way of testing, James Whittaker came with this brilliant idea of test tours. And in his book, Exploratory Testing Using Test Design, using test tours, there's this sentence: exploratory testing without guidance is like wandering around a city looking for cool tourist attractions. It helps to have a guide and to understand something about your destination. James Whittaker. And let me explain that sentence by taking you to Amsterdam. I love Amsterdam. I used to live there, but by the time we started to have a family, we went somewhere else because it's a bit busy, Amsterdam. But suppose you are going to Amsterdam. Think about it. Does it feel good? Okay, cool. You fly to Schiphol, which is a bit difficult by now. You go by train to Amsterdam and you walk out to Central Station. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but I hope so. It's over here. So it's the gray thing on the top of the picture. And suppose you walk out of the Central Station and you look around and you walk a little bit further, and you see on the left-hand side, about here with the blue lines, the blue dots, you see these beautiful houses. It's really beautiful at the water, and you say, "Oh, let's go over there." Just I'm exploring without any plan, and you just walk there, and you pass these houses, and you walk for about 50 meters more. Then you could very easily end up about here, the red light district, which is very famous in the Netherlands. And suppose you're with your wife and kids, and there you see these ladies in only underwear, very little underwear actually, and that was not your plan. You don't have to make a detailed script how to explore Amsterdam or Kiev or whatever city. I like Kiev, by the way. I've been there last year. Beautiful city. But I don't make a detailed script up front that at 100 hours I want to be over there, and 10 I want to be over there. No, I make a list of things I would like to see. And because I've got only one day, I will skip some things like some beautiful musea. Don't have time for it, sorry. And I just start exploring, and I check out the different things I've seen. And after 2 hours, I look at my list and I see, okay, I've done this, and then I will do this, this, and this. So you have a kind of guidance during your exploration of the city. I would say do that if you go to Amsterdam, because people come to Amsterdam for the red light district, or to go to musea, or to go to pubs, or to go shopping. So you have a goal why you go to a certain city. And the idea of test tools is that you do exploratory testing, but you give a goal for your testing to the testers. Like the feature tool, you test all the features, so you got a list of features. Or the claims tour, some people say that, some organizations say, our application is twice as fast and costs a half of the money. Well, let's test if this claim is right. Is it twice as fast as the competitor? The data tour. We want to have test cases where we can see the creation, the reading, the updating and deleting of all the data. We could do the calculations tour if there's a lot of calculations and important calculations in the tour. Well, you can read them over here. I always like the bad parts tour, which is on 2/3 of this list. I see bugs really tend to be alive and things with a feeling because they always want to stick together. If you find one bug, test that part of the software really intense because probably there will be more bugs. And suppose you're testing a part of the system, and after an hour testing, you don't find any bugs, go test another part of the system. So for me, the bad parts tour is something I always do. And you can select which tours you're going to do, who is going to do which tour on which day. So it gives some guidance for the testing and for the testers. So 6 different ways to test a system, from detailed scripting, where the focus on preparation, the focus on planning, relying on the method, the confidence in the process and the focus on documentation, to exploratory testing on the other side, with a focus on action, more flexibility, more pragmatic. You rely more on the tester and you focus on test execution. Different ways of testing, and every situation is different. So select which way of testing fits your situation best. Some people say, well, on the left side, detailed scripting is structured testing, and on the right-hand side, exploratory testing is unstructured testing. That's not true. Exploratory testing can be very structured. So, and detailed scripting, you can make detailed scripts out of the blue, and that's very unstructured. So it is not structured versus unstructured, but scripted versus exploratory testing. Some people also say, yeah, detailed scripting, that's the real good way of testing, and that's the best way of testing. So if it's really important, do detailed scripting. If it's not that important, do exploratory testing. That is not true. I repeat, that is not true. There are some scientific evidence that exploratory testing is much more effective and much more efficient than scripted testing. Here you see, you can find it on the internet. So just type in these names in 2007. You will find a report by these guys, and they found out that defect detection efficiency. So how much time how much of the defects do you find of exploratory testing is higher compared to test case based testing. These guys, I don't try to pronounce their names, but they're here. They conclude that exploratory testing was more efficient than test case testing in our experiment. Exploratory testing was also more effective than test case based testing when detection difficulty, types of defects, and severity levels are considered. So the scientific evidence is there that exploratory testing is much better than test case based testing. There's also this great book, Experiences of Test Automation. It's outdated by now. I would advise you to read other books about test automation, but that's a different presentation. And these two guys, Alan and Newman, they had some great metrics, and they found most of the bugs, 58.2%, with exploratory testing. And apart from fixed verification, we see that automated testing doesn't find very much bugs, which is pretty logical because, especially back then, automated testing was only regression testing, so it's already been tested. And we found most of the bugs with manual, scripted, or exploratory testing. But exploratory testing is much more efficient and effective than scripted testing. So, some final thoughts, 6 minutes left. I spent some more time explaining Amsterdam, so I hope you liked that. But like I said, about 25 years ago, I started in IT, and I did some different things in the first 3 years, and then I really specialized in testing. And after about 5 to 8 years in testing, I was getting a bit bored because, yeah, you got your designs and you made your test cases, you execute the test cases. You got too less time, but you find so many bugs that you need more time. The projects were more more of the same. And actually, I left testing and I started in requirements engineering, a great occupation, by the way. It's great to do requirements engineering. And after a couple of years, I got a new test assignment, which was okay by me. And I found out that exploratory testing was around. And I made the jump from this small fishbowl to the big fishbowl. And that was so cool. And exploratory test was so much more fun, so much new things. And I started to really like testing again. And since then, I spent time in both testing and requirements analysis, and it's both fun. So please, if you're really into scripted testing, make the jump into exploratory testing. If you got no idea how to do that, please hire me for doing a course. This was a commercial quote, and you will see that it will be very successful, very much fun. Here are some sources for further reading. Explore It by Elizabeth Hendrickson, great book. Exploratory Testing by James Whittaker, also a great book. Gerald Weinberg, officially. Perfect Software and Other Illusions About Testing. It's fun to read that book. Please read it. Lessons learned in software testing. You can see it over here. And the last one is something written by me. You can download it for free, and it will explain the different ways of testing. Some articles, if you take Google and just write in the article names which are shown here, you will find the article. They're all publicly available, and if you read all the articles, you get a very good idea what exploratory testing can be, what bug hunts and session-based testing can be. Some websites. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. Let me take a look. Yeah, there are some new things in Slack. Let me read them. Yeah, bug hunts is fun. Yeah, absolutely right, Natalia. Bug hunts are really fun. So I really support that one. Never ever tested in pairs in 13 years. Oh, Svetlana, go experiment with it. I like testing in pairs, especially with someone who's not like me, who's not a professional tester, but a user or a developer or the product owner. Is great to test in pairs. So please go experiment with it, and I hope that one day I will get a LinkedIn message by you that you've done that. How do I apply exploratory testing in my project where I need to provide traceability and reporting? Well, that's a good question, Arena, and I could spend 45 minutes on this. You can do it, but people have to be willing to get the traceability and reporting afterwards, not upfront. So you didn't plan your traceability and reporting up front, but maybe this is not the perfect project to do that. Maybe we could get in contact somehow and talk a little bit further about your situation with Teams or Skype or things like that. We could discuss this, but it's a very broad question. Then Mikhail has got a question. It's very interesting topic. Thanks a lot. Got one question. Are there studies? Are these studies the links to which you provided relevant after 6 to 13 years? I'm surprised that so far nothing has changed in the approaches of testing, or can they be used as food for thought and adapt to today's reality? Yes, it can be used as food for thought, definitely. But I don't agree with Michael that there's nothing changed in the approach in testing. If you look at ICQB, you're right, nothing changed in the approach of testing. But if you look at the other sources, like I've given you, definitely has changed things. I started to use exploratory testing 5 to 7 years ago, and we started to do courses within our organization, and they really changed things into our organization. And a lot of people within our organization rarely use the classical way of testing. So maybe in your situation, it hasn't changed very much, but you can change it, Michael. Please experiment with it and try it. Um, Stas says, I think we can call this bug bush. Yeah. Bug hunt is sometimes also called a bug bush. I'm very happy you say that, Stas. So if you want to have more information on bug hunt, you can also Google on bug bush. I call it bug hunts because I don't have to explain to other people what a bug hunt is because it's self-explaining. While a bug bush is not, at least in the Netherlands, not understood by everybody, but some people call it bug bush. That's fine. I don't see any other questions coming up, so that brings me to the end of this presentation. It's strange. I don't see you. I do feel you, by the way. I really got the idea that people are listening. But I want to thank you very much for your attention. Stay healthy, and I hope to see you in real life again one day next year, maybe a year after, in Kiev or somewhere else. Thank you very much. Have a great conference, and keep exploring and keep experimenting. Goodbye.